You will see now. Okay.
Okay. All right. Good luck.
Oh, thanks. Welcome everyone, and good afternoon to everyone in the from Toronto, and good morning to folks at the West Coast. This is your coach Sean. I'm here with my partner in crime, Mike, in the studio to help me answer your questions. Um, Welcome again to the Capstone 1 to the CFE Day 1 webinars. A little bit about myself. Over the past few years, I had the fun to mark a lot of Day 1 papers, as well as Capstone 1 papers, either with the CPA in their Capstone 2 program, and as well as this prep formula. So I do have a lot of stuff to say about the Day 1, especially to the Day 1 writers. So in today's webinar, I want to share a few of the tips and some pitfalls I have seen over the years from my marking, and hopefully it will make your transition from Capstone 1 to CFE Day 1 a lot easier. For the folks who are rewriting Day 1, this is especially for you. I'm confident really this is your year to pass. So I want to make it as interactive as possible. Mike has agreed to help me answer questions. Don't feel bad for him. We're going to go out to a bar later, and hopefully with some good wine, VQA qualified. So just as a thank you to him. But please ask any questions as you like, and we'll get started. Okay, some standard disclosure. Okay, prep formulas live webinars comprise of several independent consultants and contractors like me. The interpretation below are my own personal opinion, on all rights reserved. I don't represent any viewpoints of CPA Canada or any of the provincial bodies. Please consult. If you have any questions regarding the actual official process, do talk to your provincial CPA bodies. And again, this is just for your illustration information only, and my personal opinion. Great. Okay, so every time when I talk to a repeat writer, I always begin our conversation with a very simple question. So what went wrong last year, right? And more importantly, what went right in the process. And here I summarize a few conversations and points throughout my conversations with them. So the almost very common ones is I was very confident in qualitative, but I knew my quantitative was weak. So this is evident actually starting from 2015. So if you had a pleasure to read the board examiner's report, seems to get longer and longer every year. Starting in 2015, when there's only really one volume of board examiner's report, you combine perhaps day 1 and day 2, 3 together, and later on they actually separate out the volumes. So there was a key comments year after year is that people are somehow struggling with quantitative analysis and decided to skip altogether in the beginning. So the board was not very happy about it. So they inserted a comment say, you know what, avoiding quant is a fatal flaw to pass day 1 of CFE. Therefore, do not skip quant if you want to pass, and at least attempt to address it. 4 years on, if you continue reading it, even closer, even in this year, there's still a sentence that says avoiding quant is a fatal flaw, and please address it. And the board examiners are still interested in seeing the mindset is shifting to do some quantitative analysis. And we'll talk a little more about this quantitative analysis, how to address it. And the key is whatever you do, don't be intimidated by the quantitative analysis, and keep in mind you need to do it in order to pass the CFE Day 1. All right, and a very related note. So there's another comment. I think I was weak in technical knowledge, but I thought they didn't matter for day one. And yeah, I get it. And I understand sometimes when even in the board examiner's report in the beginning it says, well, we'll focus on enabling competencies, and this is different from day 2 and 3. But I want to be clear. The technicals do matter, a period. You have to have a knowledge of how to approach certain issues, and if you think about different competencies a CPA must have, you have your technical core competencies: financial reporting, finance, taxation, assurance, etc. At the end, throughout, the integrative part is really the enabling competencies, and they are there to help you approach a problem and you really understand what tools can I get from the toolbox in order to solve this kind of problems. While you can't really know how to approach it unless you have a basic idea of what this tool is trying to do, right? So for sure, we'll have a very big refresher on certain topics, and also recommend everyone to take a look at a few other platform webinars that goes into details into some technical aspects. So the third comment is very interesting. So I spent 30 minutes to read, only to realize many of the points after finish exam. So this is what I call I will wing it on the exam approach, and it's never really good. So if you think about throughout your career in the the CPA program, have you ever only spent about 30 minutes in a case? So if you spent probably for day 2 about 1.5 hours to read and plan, and 1/3 of the time on any of the day 3 case, ask yourself why would you spend only 30 minutes then? And sometimes I think people's reactions, well, I don't know what to plan, right? What to really put in my planning document. And today we also did a bit of a walkthrough on the last year's FET topics. To simulate, actually today, this morning, I just opened up the exam, and then I open up my iPad, start do a quick sketch to see, okay, what realistically an hour I can put in, and we'll talk about that, to share about that. Okay, so the next quote is, I don't have time, I don't know how to write a qualitative parts, and while this is almost as bad as those generic procedures we see in day 2, which I'm at war with. People who know me knows I really hate fancy tell me nothing words, and I have a strong opinion to see any generic words used in the day 1. Let me give you some example. Have you ever written something like, well, it will help the synergy, it will impact the net income, the profitability, and yes, wait for it, it will fit the mission and vision. Well, they're all wonderful, and I agree with them. Yeah, it will impact, it fits the mission and vision. Yep, I'll check the box, great. But the truth is, and the most important part is, you leave me really hanging there. Well, I need to know why. What does impact mean, right? Or do you mean the profitability will be impacted by, it would be decreased because of X, will be increased because of this approach you're doing, or maybe your profitability wouldn't really change this year, but by doing all the operational issues later on, it will be better, right? So what does impact mean? Fits mission and vision for sure is a very common pros and cons in qualitative analysis, and I agree this is a very important part, but you have to tell me what part of mission or vision you are talking about, right? So what part of it and why does it matter, right? So is the so what part I really want to know, and sometimes I'm just reading there and scratching my head, and well, I just wish I can talk to you because I don't know what you're really referring to. And the final one, yeah, I'm gonna put if I can, a sad emoji here. And to be honest, I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I heard it a lot from the third time. Unfortunately, folks are writing day one, they pass days 2 and 3 in first go, and just can't seem to grasp the day one concept. And to me, sometimes it's a lot easier to address in a sense that you probably just need to shift the mindset from day 2 and 3 into day one, right? Because day one is you need to see the forest versus looking at the tree. And day 2 and 3, somewhat the requirement is a bit direct, right? And they will ask you, please do this and this, and okay, for this particular problems, I need to look at the NPV analysis, and you look at the payback. But when you look at day one, sometimes you just say, oh, please tell me your thoughts on the strategic options and whether or not we should do X. So sometimes you may not immediately know how to approach it, but be confident. Changing the mindset is one of the most important things in order to really pass day one of CFE. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the plan for today. I'm using this ready, get set, and go approach. Okay. And in the first part, we'll talk about what really is CFE day one. Why is it that different from the rest of the CFE and capstone number one, capstone one? And yes, we'll do a bit of very light technical refresh, because first, I think there are other webinars did wonderful jobs telling you nuts and bolts, and it's not a purpose for today. I do want to highlight a few toolbox you should use when you approach a day one case. We'll talk about it, some parts in finance, management, accounting, strategy, and governance. Again, I encourage you to look at the webinars other folks have put out in Prep Formula, and learn if you have any questions, you can seek more answers that way. And finally, I know somewhere in the description we're talking about 10 things to do, so I saved the best to last. We'll talk about 10 things to do before now and your capstone 2 or CFE day 1 to help you better prepare and plan your study schedule. And we'll do a bit of reading and planning of the case from last year. So I'm not taking any fun out of the current material, so you still have a chance to learn it fresh, but we'll show you the process involved to talk about the last year's FVT case. Okay, sounds good. Right. Okay, so what is CFE day 1? So I want to perhaps start from at the end, right? So we mentioned about a lot about the comments from the board examiners, and so I would like to show everyone what are some comments we heard from the board examiners, and I will provide some good commentaries. Right. So number one comments I put it is actually very interesting. When I read all those reports, quite a fun read, but very interesting to see there's certain themes and even the sentences that carry over and over and over every year. I'm actually be able to fit it into a nice little diagram here. So first, number one comment is avoiding the numbers is a fatal flaw for the day one case. Like I said in the beginning, in 2015 think some people just ignore it altogether. Don't know why, but so the board put out a very strong message, say, thee shall try quantitative or thee will fail. So here, number one, avoid the numbers, the fatal flaw. Yes, but I think this trend could continue. Some people are still going to be struggling, but I'm here to warn you. Devote some time to do your quantitative analysis, and especially I think this year is a wonderful case. I even read in the comment that this year's quantitative is a little bit heavier. Maybe it's more involved, but the message is out there. Still, please do a quantitative, and that I think is really important when you think about how to approach a quantitative. Right? It's going to be a bit different from your day 2 PM elective or finance elective. It's not necessary to get the right response. In fact, in the report, it says there's no one correct answer. What people are interested in is how did you approach? Why did you choose this? Is your method the right correct one? Or perhaps in the case, they already tell you, hey, I already prepared the analysis, thank you very much, but tell me, is this the right one? So it's your job to take it apart and then start critiquing, right? Are we using the right assumptions? Does it really make sense? All right. Okay, the second very popular one, so my personal favorite, too much time is preparing a full situational analysis. I think people are very, very comfortable with this part, situational analysis, because boy, your team spends so much time in Capstone 1 thinking through it, and why should you not showcase your skills in the day 1 by repeating a lot of the wonderful per-style analysis, Porter 5 forces, or even your SWOT analysis. And the key here is a balance, right? And I think people are comfortable with this and thinking that false hope that this may help you with passing CFE. But the key is you need to integrate. You need to integrate your situational analysis, not a full one, a situational analysis everywhere into your response. It's not just important to simply identify them. Well, make use of it, right? So keep it short. We're here for a short time, not a long time. Keep it short, keep it to a point, and then start integrating them. That's where the value is. Okay, it is important to discuss strategic implications. Yes, again, you need to spend more time. Some people, when I ask, okay, how would you plan? How did you plan? And then first they're shocked that why do I have to plan day 1? Yet of course you have to. And then, well, how much do you allocate the time? I'm shocked that people only spend sometimes only an hour and a half. Well, this needs to be a bit longer, right? Think about, you probably will have 4, anywhere between 3 and 5 strategic options, and each option will have a very detailed discussion on quantitative as well as qualitative. I would expect at least you'll spend about 30 minutes per strategic option, right? If you time that by 4, that's easily 2 hours. So important to talk about strategic options and as well as implications. By that I mean some options are connected, right? So you have think about, okay, I need to start thinking about what sequence should I approach the strategic options, right? Maybe I need to talk about this first before I can talk about the second one. And how do they connect? Like, how do I carry out that strategic options? That's very important as well. Okay, the lost sight of the big picture issue. You're gonna see, I think there could be a trend of, CPAs need to be a big picture strategic thinker. Therefore, you could see these type of questions, issues coming up on the exam. And I always want to think is, if there's something keep bugging you on the case, you probably want to talk about it, right? So if there's always a comment saying, hey, we don't like this option, or there's certain individuals like, well, you haven't done this, or someone seems very aggressive, or even though, the first question they could ask, well, there's always an option to sell and close down. So there's one big issue out there, right? Like, be it as a whole, should the company be going concern? Be it, is there any problem with the president or CEO or management team, there's something bugging you, make note of that, and then come back to it after do your analysis. Okay, ranking of the issues continue to be important on the case. Again, that's why it is so important to start ranking and thinking holistically about the case. You have 4 hours, that's enough time. Take the time to really start linking, right? What are the key required? What is the big dollar amount? What is the impact? What is number one thing I need to do to stay alive, right? So these are the things you need to start thinking before you type the single word on the Word or Excel sheet. Okay, expected to conclude on each analysis if they completed. Yes, conclusion is always important, and more so in day one because we're interested in how you address some big picture problem, and you need to summarize and your recommendations. You need to make decisions, conclusions whenever you can. Do it more so than you think is a bit necessary, but keep on repeating what your objectives, coming back to make a very balanced and supportive decision. Okay, all right. Okay, so differences between day one and capstone one. So a lot of folks are currently doing capstone one or did capstone one last year, and I think this is an important slide to think about why you need to have that mindset shift. Okay, so number one is, well, you don't have 8 weeks to write this case. You have 4 hours. So what does that mean? That means you cannot cover everything, right? Like I'm going to repeat, sometimes you just can't. You have to rank the issues. So rank the issue is strategic options, always need to discuss in depth, right? But then you could have a laundry list of operational issues. So I think in more recent, I don't think there are as many operational issues, but it could come back. But the key is for the operational issues, rank it. Let's see what are the most important part. We're here to have a good quality answer versus quantity, right? So you want to have a good discussion. Use weakness, implication, recommendation. Use your issue analysis conclusion, but fully discuss that operational issues versus just say, hey, 1 sentence each and hope for the best, right? Similar to your day 2 or 3 case, you want to demonstrate the depth in that. Okay, so situational analysis, you're out of your comfort zone, right? Here we're not doing capstone 1 level of situational analysis. We're here for a very direct, pointed change. Okay, what has changed from your capstone 1 days? Here, think about from the SWOT perspective. Has any strength now become a weakness? Is there anything externally can change a weakness, make it into a strength, or the other way around, right? Or is there any opportunities we should have caught on early on, but we didn't, so now it becomes a threat? These are things we need to look at. You could see in the exhibit from the quantitative perspective some key ratios. Okay, so these ratios, you need to think, okay, can I compare to the industry benchmark, right? So what are some key ratios back in capstone 1 that are very relevant, especially if there's a covenant we need to meet? Are we still meeting the covenant, right? We were better than industry on certain aspects of the ratio. How has it changed? We could also take a look at the trend analysis, looking back from history, and see, okay, are we doing well? Are we not? But the key is also focus on the change and think how you can link that change in ratio into your strategic options, right? Some of them can be referenced into your qualitative or your quantitative to see, hey, you know what? Our certain cost has really increased. So this strategic option maybe can help us bring down that cost. that's a good link to your situational analysis. Okay, so another one is I want to be clear here. The fewer issues doesn't mean that you're going to see fewer strategic options. So capstone 1, you could see probably 4 strategic options. You're probably going to see anywhere between 3 and 5, similar number of strategic options, right? But here is fewer issues, and mainly I think towards, we're trying to test, financial reporting issues, some taxation issues, and other issues bundle up in the operational issues. And here, because of time constraint and the purpose of this exam on day 1, you may not see them, right? And also external research, it was encouraged in capstone 1, but not so in capstone 2. In your day 1, because you can't really see it. Okay. Similarities between day 1 and capstone 1. So first, it is a continuation of capstone 1. So make sure you familiar yourself with capstone 1 case. The layout of the case will be going to be a bit very similar, and the issue could be extension from capstone 1 case, meaning that if we have taken root of this option, and here's a range of different issues we have encountered. So always remember to get familiar with capstone 1 case again. The approach between day 1 and the capstone 1 is the same. The sections are similar. So by that I mean, in your response, the format is going to be likely a bit similar, right? So you could have a quick situational analysis, and then you get into decision criteria, and then you get into strategic options, and then you have operational options, and you wrap up as a nice conclusion. The approach is going to be similar, and the tools are the same, regardless of day 1 or capstone 1. So the tools we're going to talk about later on is equally applicable. And in fact, I encourage you to go back to your capstone 1 and then rethink the sections you didn't do. Try different other sections. Make sure you're comfortable with how to approach this type of strategic options using the toolbox, right? Like if I have to do this on day 1, what would I do? Okay. And another fun exercise is you can always, think about different scenarios, right? If you are the CEO, what could go differently? Well, there could be expansion, there could be close down of the divisions, there could be, we're going into a different market, there could be, all sorts of things. We could have financing problems, or maybe we're so successful, some people may want to approach us to have other strategic partnerships. So you name it, right? So have fun with capstone 1, think about different scenarios, and think about how you can approach that. Okay, so this is a fun slide too. So differences between day 1 and day 2 and 3. Okay, day 1, this is some comments from the examiner's report too. Day 1 case is designed to assess enabling skills. By that I mean, again, technical is important, but it's being tested a different way. Okay, so we want to focus on the boardroom and the senior management type of level discussion. By that, I think what it means is you have to, as the consultant or someone walking into the boardroom or into a management discussion, ask yourself, okay, what are we trying to decide on? Okay, what is the big picture issue? What are some issues I'm being asked? And do I have enough information to respond to that? And does the board or the management need more information to make that decision? So that's level of thinking you need to be. So a lot of times as thinking about if you're management, senior management, well, you don't have to do the detailed calculation. Someone can do it for you, right? Could it be more junior people, even a robot? Right? So you could have all this AI, they could do it, they can spit out the data to you, make sense of it, right? So bring the data, combine it into a useful information, and feed it to your board and your management. That's the level of thinking. So focus on the forest, not individual trees. What exactly we're trying to do, achieve here, okay? And I do want to, I don't think we talk a lot about strategic options. So strategy is something will impact your company either immediately or very shortly down the road. Um, we see that every day in our lives. So last year we're thinking about, buying a house, right? So that's a big strategic major decision for us. But so we make that decision. That's a strategy we want to approach. Now, to how to get there, that's operational issue. So we need to meet with realtor. We need to get our financing together. We need to select the good school district. All of these things are important, but they're secondary to my strategy. Like I need to buy a house because or family expanding. We need more space. So hopefully that's a good analogy to strategy versus operational. So that's why it's so important to address strategy. Otherwise, like you can be blindsided by a million other little things. You lost your ranking, your balance. Okay. All right. So here, this slide is talk about the typical layout for day one. So on the left hand side, we have a typical structure of your response, and on the right hand side, I make it very, very broadly what your reading sequence should be and how do they kind of feed. We'll talk about how they feed into your structure. Okay, so quick focus on the change situational analysis. Notice the link goes everywhere. So it doesn't just go to strategic issues. It can go to recommendation. It can go to operational issues. This sets the stage, but focus on the change and keep it short and to the point. Strategic issues is your meat of that analysis. So you think about overall strategy, what your management is trying to achieve, overall qualitative analysis, make a recommendation, and that had to integrate your situational analysis there. And to get to your strategic options, you have to think about operationally, right? So there could be a few operational issues you need to address. Think about ranking here is also important, right? So think about how do you rank them. Are they all equally important, or you could, let's say, answer a few very well, and unfortunately you don't have time, then you don't have time. Set a framework and link to the strategy. Okay. Conclusion and recommendation. So to decide between different options, you likely going to have a set of criteria, right? So the criteria, again, comes either from a SWOT or your key success factors. And towards the end, you need to somewhat, evaluate the different options. And here I want to spend a minute on this. People sometimes assumes your marker will understand your nice table. Say, hey, strategic number 1, I have criteria A, B, C. I have a 10. Strategic number 2, I have 4. Strategic number 3, I have 2. Therefore, 10, I'll choose number 1. Well, I have an issue with that because what does 10 mean, right? Is 10 meaning rank number 10? 10 meaning the weighting of is 10, therefore it is the best? Don't assume I have that knowledge of you ranking them, right? And also tell me why you have to chosen that decision criteria. Remember, if I'm the board, I'm the management, I'm interested in how you made that decision, right? That's part, you need to get my buy-in, so convince me, right? So here, explain your ranking methodology. It doesn't have to be long, just one sentence. Say, hey, we have chosen 1 to be the best, 4 to be the worst, and here's my decision. Okay. All right, so on the right-hand side, let's talk about the structure. I haven't seen a big change on the structure, but usually you're going to have a big, somewhat 1 to 2 page of a background of industry of your company, and then followed by a critical board meeting dialogue. Okay, that will tell you what they need you to be doing and what your end product will be. And then appendixes give you more information related to your relevant strategic options. In terms of reading it, we'll talk a bit more on that, but I would say skim through the first 2 paragraphs, just get the feeling. You don't have to even read in detail. Just say, hey, what's my role? Where are we? What time is it? What decision have they made? And how is the company doing right now? And then boom, go moving into the board meeting dialogue to see, oh, okay, so here are the things I need to do, and then you can go back to reread the first 2 pages. Trust me, it will bring purpose to your reading. First, you not only you identify your situational analysis points, but also you can start slotting them into your strategic options. Okay, and appendix, similar to how you will use on your day 2 or day 3, I think is just use information and select the toolbox first, get a good framework, and then see how you can integrate those information into your results. Okay, so here this is talking about the building block to pass the CFE day 1, and you can use this to kind of plan your study schedule for the next while. And I want to say that there are four steps. So the first step is get a good grasp of the Capstone 1 case, and we already talked about the importance of that and the similarities. Have a good understanding. And then second is a bit of refresher on the right tools, the toolbox you should use, and then here and then you're ready to do more practice and more practice to look at effective reading and planning, ranking the issues, and actually do those. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of different cases for the current Capstone 1, but you know what? The best way to learn is just do the actual questions, right? You can go back to different years. The worst case is you don't have a good situational analysis, but at this point, you're more interested in how in framing the questions, in framing the solutions for the strategic options. So it can always force you to ignore the situational analysis for a bit and focus primarily on your strategic options. Okay, and after you've done that, use the opportunity to debrief and then improve. 4 hours is a bit long, so our recommendations maybe do it first thing in the day, and then takes the rest of the day off, and the next day spend in the beginning more hours to debriefing, but towards the end you can shorten it as you get a lot better. Okay, so that's the whole process, and you can use that to in your scheduling to roughly bifurcate them into these sections. Okay, so one more slide on the Capstone 1 takeaways. Okay, so there are only few things I think you really need to know before you're writing your day 1 case. Okay, so you need to understand what the mission and vision of the company is. You need to understand what the key success factors of the company as well as in the industry. You need to understand who the stakeholders are and what are their preference, what is the overall financial conditions when you leave the Capstone 1 case, what are the key covenants the company must meet, what are the strategic issues are there, I'm sorry for a typo, and what are the approaches being used. So these are important part, especially on the key success factors, because likely you will not have that much information on them when you're reading your day 1 case. But all these questions are relevant questions. You need to be comfortable with them. One good approach of doing this is get a blank piece of paper, just put out a few paragraphs. What do I know about Capstone 1 at this stage? And then read it to see, okay, am I comfortable with my answers right now before I move on to do more practice? Okay, it's very important to make sure you do those because I think you don't have to retain a lot of information from your Capstone 1 case, but doing targeted learning and transitioning will benefit for sure. All right, so as promised, we're going to do a little bit of technical refresher. See, we're good on time. So it's gonna be fairly quick. We'll start with finance concepts, and then we'll move on to management accounting, and we'll end with some part of the strategy and governance analysis. Okay, and all these are, again, I mean, just to give you a flavor of it and to see, okay, do I roughly understand what we're doing here, or do I need more information to listen to more webinars? Okay, so in finance, 5 different topics. Each of them are bring a bit flavor to your situational analysis or towards your strategic options. You need to know how to do financial statement analysis and forecasting. It's a given. You need to be comfortable with DCF. You need to be able to do a sort of ratio analysis to see what is the liquidity condition, what is the debt covenant, what is my ability to pay off my interest, all sorts of fun. And this can also lead to your building up the forecast, either in your operational issues or to your strategic issues, to evaluate option 1 with option B. Okay, capital market. This is more of a evaluate different financing vehicle, right? So you could either use debt or you could use equity. Okay, think about what are the costs related to that. We use the acronym called ACTORS. So to evaluate, this is my favorite. You think about the amount. That's for A, amount of the financing. Do I have enough? C, the cost. Is it fixed interest? Is it variable interest? Is it a preferred share you're required to pay for the dividend on that? What's the term? Will it cover my whole term of the project? What is the obligation, right? Do I have to make that payment? What is the reporting implication? Debt, equity play a big role in your covenant. Okay, and stakeholder preference. Some people just hate debt, right? Some people are not comfortable putting out their personal guarantee. So these are all very important preference you should consider. Okay, again, it's actors. And moving on to capital budgeting. Capital budgeting is something you need to make a decision on whether or not to buy something, right? Like if you think about using my example, buying a house. I'm gonna buy a house. Well, how do I know what should I buy, A versus B? You can use DCF. But that's not the only way, right? We're gonna talk more on the NPV analysis, on the payback period, and not the goal here is, and the thought is, not every complex solution is the best one, right? Sometimes it doesn't have to be. We're not here to see how fancy your modeling skill is. I just need an answer. So if you think a simple payback period is relevant, by all means use that payback period. If you think I have a defined timeline, I have a defined WACC or something that can help me discount, go for NPV analysis or an IRR. Here is to choose the right stuff and tell the markers how you have used that tool. Okay, cost of capital, long-term financial policy. Again, this links to your financing options as well as how to choose the right discount. There could be some questions on the WACC calculation and discount rate, but to be honest, I can't see a very detailed ask for you to choose this WACC. I think it's getting into too much of a detail for finance. You could see it, definitely fair game for day 2 and 3, but day 1, again, is your toolbox. Okay, keep that in mind when you select, when you approach your technical for finance. Couple of topics that are at level 1, level A for core 1, so definitely expected to do that in your day 1 of the CFE. The first is evaluate financial state of the entity, and you use that in your situational analysis a lot. Again, choose the right tool, compare with benchmark, and conclude on the entity's financial state. Okay, and evaluate entity's cash flow and working capital. that's also very important, especially if you want to choose that as one of your decision criteria, right? If front and center, your management tells you we are struggling cash wise, oh, you better put that on your decision criteria. So while cash is very important, so liquidity ratio, think about that. Can we, and then immediate question is, well, can we pay any of my required interest, right? What's our financing decision? How will that impact my my covenant, right? Am I allowed to borrow more? And working capital, can I sell something very quickly and generate cash? So that that would be one of your focal points on your analysis, be it in your qualitative or your quantitative. Okay. Conclusion here is your financial state, and if you're choosing the capital budgeting decision, talk about what NPV means to the reader, and state your conclusions there. Okay. Another slide, we'll talk about the financial ratio analysis. Again, shouldn't be a surprising and very new to you. We have 4 different: liquidity, activity, solvency, and profitability. Again, check the appendices and think about your capstone 1. What are the key ones that industry you're looking at? Okay, that dictates your focus on your situational analysis as well as your strategic options. Okay, know what they mean. Okay, so I've asked you what inventory turnover is. You have to tell me, well, what does it mean, and what does that signifies, right? So maybe we're not moving our inventory fast enough. We're not selling it. While looking at our supply chain, should we make some adjustments, have a more of a just-in-time model, right? Or shall we maybe do more marketing, like start moving them faster? What are the ways? What does it tell you compared to industry? Maybe sometimes it is industry norm not to have a very high inventory turnover, right? So depends on your circumstance as well as your industry. Okay, profitability ratio. Some people really like this profitability ratio and put it everywhere into your decision criteria, bleeding into your qualitative. I think do whatever the case makes sense by all means, but I'm really looking forward to is the so what factor, right? Why does profitability matter? Why is it so important? And break it down. Profitability can mean a lot of things, right? Are we looking at operating cash flow could increase, or are we talking about net income, or are we talking about EBITDA? So be more specific and as you can when you discuss these issues. Okay, so the common mistake I've seen is people provide a calculation, but the discussion was very superficial and lacks relevant to be useful. Classic example is you have just a very simple cash flow. Say, hey, I got a cash flow of 5 years, my option A, and then here I did an NPV analysis, boom, I have a positive NPV, and comparing with my option B, maybe only have a 1 year or 2 year cash flow. And people make assumptions, hey, okay, so NPV is positive, of course, gotta choose this. But step back a little bit, why do we even choose NPV? Is it right framework, right? Do we have the same timeline to do this NPV analysis? What does this calculation do to you? Like, are we comparing apples to apples in these calculations? And then you have to tell me why, right? What reasonable means result, like what and significance, like why, what does this calculation tell you, and why does it matter? Okay. Candidates did not directly address the ask of the case, provide a simple overview, financial state in the current form. Yeah, here is a basic data dump of what you learned from capstone 1, and you tell it to me up front in your situational analysis and never refer back again. What a waste, right? Like, if you have done your strategic options and you reflect back that, hey, you know what, if my implementation of this is successful, maybe we'll increase this ratio, and this is meets the one of the decision criteria. So make that link, and then always think about what is the ask of the case. Okay, that's always very important. A word on the capital budgeting. So a capital budgeting process for CFE, you usually in real life, you have to gather information, you have to apply the relevant toolbox, okay, tool, and then you need to drive insight. So the case number one is already done for you. You have all the information you do. So what you need to do is you need to slow down and then do a good outline and track different information, okay? And then you need to use your knowledge to do a good select the right tool. Okay, again, I don't want to say absolutely use MPV. This is just one of the tools, and I've seen so many candidates that are just saying, "Hey, I'm going to do MPV," and next option MPV, the third option MPV, without really telling me why do we need MPV. Even if the case asks you, "Hey, I've done a payback. Can you comment on that?" No, I'm going to do MPV. Why, right? So think about what's the point of that. When should you use the IRR, right? Do we have a minimum threshold of selecting any of the projects, right? So does it make sense to do that? Payback period. People have such a negative reaction to it, and it's too simple. Yes, I understand, but it's effective sometimes. So especially when you're running out of time, using payback, it could be an effective way to talk. The more important part is drive insights. What does this number you calculate mean? Why does it matter, and how do they impact my strategic option? Okay. Now we're moving on to more of the cash flow analysis. So you're gonna see it again in other webinars too. I'm here to focus on the cash flow component. What should be included in cash flow? You're gonna see sometimes have a sunk cost. That those are the research costs you have already spent up front. Maybe the things you have already considered is already done in the past. You don't include that in your cash flow analysis. What's relevant though is your opportunity cost, right? Sometimes in the case, people focus on, okay, this is option A, here are the costs. Option B, here are the costs. And think about if option A and option B are mutually exclusive, then ask yourself, well, should we maybe think about if I do A, what are the opportunity costs associated to it, right? You could do a longer way of, just doing two different options and then compare it, or you could do incremental costs, whatever way you think is fast or you're comfortable with, but include your opportunity costs. Net working capital. Sometimes when you initially start a project, you need to inject some working capital, but later on you could get it back, right? So consider when you should include it, and remember to take it back towards the end of your project life. Financing cost. Here, if we're doing a capital budget decisions, again, this is my analogy: is are we borrowing money to finance, or are we buying a house? So when you buying a house, at least my experience is, yes, I make sure I can get the necessary financing, and then I'll go for a house. But that financing decision isn't really necessarily dictating what kind of house I want. I set up my budget, but what kind of, and then that decision ends there for my financing. So when you do your capital budgeting, your risk of financing already being baked into your WACC, your capital, your discount rate. So and you use that to do your NPV. So in terms of financing costs, leave it to when you have to forecast your cash flow. That in that case, yes, financing does matter because I need to pay out. It is real cash. But when you're evaluating different projects, financing costs isn't necessarily shouldn't be included to make your decision on your NPV. CCA, yeah, it is the actual cost, right? So the tax saving you could get, but when you sell it, you're gonna you're gonna lose your tax shield. So consider that in your analysis. And again, like I said, these are more of an information you need to think about in your after tax cash flow calculation when you do your capital budgeting analysis. So now we have that. Let's look at the investment criteria. So investment criteria could be, you can use either DCF model, that means you use NPV, or you use the IRR. Again, you explain what result you're expecting. Always useful, right? NPV positive means, okay, so making money, therefore showing this project is better than an NPV negative, right? IRR, yeah, this internal rate of return on this project is 5%. Well, but it's good, but is lower than our minimum required return. Therefore, we're rejecting this. Payback period, you can use an undiscounted way of payback. You could use a discounted way of payback. Again, is a simple trick. In day one, I think it's more important to focus on what criteria and what toolbox rather than which one is fancier, right? And especially if the case has asked you to use one or comment on one, by all means, you should talk about that. Okay, right? So if we talk about the management accounting part, I think break-even is a useful tool when you have to, especially if you want to do a new venture into a different products, right? So how many units should you sell in order to break even? By the way, so if reading this past year's board examiner report, there was a mention there. So some people like struggling with a basic break-even analysis. Do take note of that and think about, go back to basics, right? What are the some fundamental things in management accounting I should know? Break-even point, I think, should be every accountant should be able to do. And think about what, in units, or we're looking at in dollars. I don't think you need to go a lot fancier than into a different way to calculate break-even multiple products. But here, just know here's a useful tool, right? When you have a new product and you need to calculate, there's one way to make that decision. Okay, and another part in your quantitative criteria is thinking about different scenarios and how to apply that. So when we look at different scenarios, you're going to see that a lot in different day one case. Well, should we accept a special order, or should we at the lower price? Should we make or buy a component, right? Or to produce, or maybe we shouldn't really be producing this. Maybe we should outsource, right? Should we sell the process and product altogether? This is especially important when you think about you're short on cash. You need the quick liquidity injection. I'm going to sell it, but there's a stream of different issues coming after that, right? Shut down the unprofitable segment. Yep. So very reasonable scenario you're going to see. And I think one word here is think about the incremental, right? Like comparing your option 1, option 2, what has really changed, right? Or compare them to status quo. What is the impact? What has changed? Not necessarily just see, okay, word by word what the case is telling you, but what maybe we have to consider the opportunity cost. We're missing out on this. Okay. Again, this is not meant to be a very deep dive, but it's a quick refresher. Qualitative analysis. Think you always want to have a balanced discussion. So you should never only allocate 5 minutes. In fact, I can't really think you can use 5 minutes on the case to do anything substantial, right? So don't leave your qualitative discussion to 5 minutes. You get stressed out. That will, before you know it, 3 minutes already gone, and then you only can manage to type 3 different short answers, and they're useless sometimes. So here is don't don't skip words, and don't please tell me using a more fuller sentence to tell me like what is the results, what is implication, what is the impact on my decision, right? Again, I want to stress the number 2 point. I've seen this a lot, and this year the examiners echo my reaction. Now we're seeing some quantitative analysis discussion creeping into my qualitative discussion. That's not the right way. I'll give you an example. Some people think, okay, in my did a nice cash flow analysis or did NPV, conclude the project's profitable, say, hey, okay, fair enough, I can't really rely only on my quantitative, let's do qualitative. And right away in the qualitative say, hey, because we do this, option A, we're saving on cost, therefore it's better for my profitability, and therefore it's a good qualitative discussion. To me, that's not a qualitative. You already told me that in your quantitative. You did a nice job using your cash flow, telling me that you already incorporated. So why would I want to see it again in a qualitative discussion? So try to avoid talking about solely on the profitability and how you calculate that profitability. Okay, changing the way of focus. Here's the seeing the picture, big picture forest kind of idea. If you can think about how that would impact your strategy, that's what I want to see, right? A lot of people saying fit mission and vision. Okay, that's half a point, but more importantly, while my mission and vision wants to be, my vision says we want to be the best, selling the best product here, and this option, well, it does exactly that, therefore it fits that. Or you can say, we want one key success factor is we want constantly innovating, so this project does do that, right? Or you can go back to your strengths, opportunity, anything you can strengthening that strength, reverting that weaknesses, take advantage of opportunity, or manage your risk at the threat. That's a good qualitative discussion. Okay, I don't want to see you just regurgitating what you have done in your quantitative analysis. That offers very little value in the qualitative strategic discussion. So remember to do that. Again, well, I already said that. Link to our core competencies. So remember to provide a recommendation. So all these to say that don't leave 5 minutes. Okay, so rule of thumb, at least spend half the time your quantitative and your qualitative. Okay, and whatever you can do in the set time for quantitative, move on. Think about your qualitative. We're not looking for a lot of information, but I want to see a clear discussion of identifying and then talking about the implication of this issue. Okay, here strategy and governance. So I think this strategy and governance kind of like almost a blood flow of your, it connects different parts of your response. So first, okay, you can see them in your operational issues, right? They may ask you to comment on, we may have some issues with our war system, we may have something about our governance, we need better oversight, more control, we could have an ethical dilemma we need to talk about. These shouldn't trump your discussion on strategic options. Here ranking is key. But when you discuss that, I would like to see a full discussion. So such as, well, what's the weaknesses currently, what is the implication, what is recommendation you can propose to the board or to management. Strategy, that's a connecting part differently. This is where the big picture coming in. What are the core competencies? Are we focusing on the value? Are we focused on the cost? What is our mission and vision? Do they meet my strategic options? Do they are reflected in there, or maybe it's time to change because externally the environment has changed so much, we have to evolve, right? So these are all very important. You need to connect to that. All right, so well, we're really doing well on time. I want to end this technical part talking about your plan to succeed. Okay, so that's the again the 10 things you should do. Um, so obviously, the number one thing is um, have a plan. So think about using my previous plan on the different phases of your strategy or your exam preparation strategy. First, talk about get familiarized with your capstone one case. Okay, do I understand all the key issues or strategic options? Do I understand the SWOT or my key success factors in there? Okay, from the technical building perspective, it's worthwhile to check out a few other webinars, and also have a take a look at the board examiner's report, especially the most recent ones. Think about what the board is focusing on, what they are less pleased with, and how you can prevent yourself from falling into that trap. And then practice, and debrief. And what went wrong, we will talk about that after we talk about the case, plan other scenarios and possible responses. And on the exam, we'll plan the time and stick to it. Think about which tool you'll be using. And yeah, so this is important for the people who really want to be perfect. You can't there's no one correct answer. There are multiple correct answers, well, quote unquote correct, reasonable answers. That's the creative part for day one. So even if you don't get everything correct, think about the big picture structure of your response, what can be improved on. And the final point is very important. Just believe in yourself. Make sure you understand the mindset you have to shift to adopt into writing the CFE day one, and you will be okay. So yeah, we're gonna maybe take 5 minute break, and then we'll take a look at your questions, and we'll start in 5 minutes. I'll do recapture of some questions that has been asked. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm ready to rock and roll again. Um, Before we start, a few questions and asked. I want to address them here. First, one there was a question about will every strategic option have a quant component? Here's my unofficial answer to that is yes. You will always have a quantitative analysis. You have to do it. Um, it will be very every strategic options could be very involved, right? And bear in mind that the quantitative analysis doesn't always will be a your NPV analysis, your very heavy involved quant, right? It could come with, you know what, we will give you analysis or have already done, but hey, you gotta start, you gotta critique assumptions, right? Maybe the assumptions used isn't that realistic, and then you need to propose what is the alternative sensitivity analysis, right? Even scenarios, would that work with a whole water later on? Okay, so what if you have different strategic options? Will that always lead to one conclusion? It's very case dependent. Depends on what type of strategic options questions you are being asked, right? So if the strategic options is mutually exclusive, yes, that means you need to pick one of the two, but sometimes your strategic options could link, right? So you need to maybe have to do number one, and then you will do, and then you have to look at, if I have to do one, maybe what's the next step? Maybe you can't do step two, but then that will lead to more step three. Okay, another question is how many points we should hit in the swap analysis. Again, I want to be clear here is situational analysis is there to facilitate, to integrate into your strategic options. So you could have 5, 10, but they won't count until you start showing them in your strategic options. So I want to say link wherever you can your swap analysis into your qualitative analysis. So the connection is what counts, not simply list them out. Okay, that's one thing. Please keep in mind. And also time spent on situational analysis. I would say use your judgment, but depends on what can you say, right? So that's the thing. If you keep repeating yourself, what capstone 1 is talking about, you can write 4 pages, 5 pages, that won't bring you one single mark. Keep to the point, to the change. What are the changes from capstone 1 to CFE day 1? That could work. Another tip is maybe you should think about your strategic option first, right? And then think, okay, so maybe that point in my qualitative can move up to my strategic situational analysis. Just to put it in up front, you could work from the end, right? So so the again, the short answer is don't spend too much time. Spend on the right point. Do it the right amount of time, but with integration, right? So you have to use your own judgment here. Operational issues, what percentage and how many points? Again, I think is really depends on how many issues are there, okay, and realistically, how many points you can hit in the time given. Okay, so operational issues shouldn't dominate your response. That being said, you will easily use up 1.5 hours to 2 hours on strategic options. Maybe you have about an hour left, right? And then think about, you need to talk about a conclusion, right? And then you may have to rank them against your decision criteria, and then that whatever time left is for your operational issues. So there's no magic number. There's anywhere that publish like what percentage of operational issue you need to count. But again, here is more of your judgment area, and you just have to do your best at the time allocated. Use the time you allocate as a way to evaluate versus how many you have to count. If you can write in that allocate time 2 issues, but fully using appropriate framework to discuss in depth, that's a lot better than answering 5 issues. But unfortunately, if none of those issues are hitting the sufficient depth, then again, their operational issue may not be a yes, right? So this is a very highly judgment area. Okay. There was also a comment why we decided you use the FVT case and not the winery case. Here, I want to talk about the purpose of this webinar is building a bridge between your Capstone 1 and your CFE Day 1. First, people who are repeat writers, they don't have a lot of materials out there, so I don't want to take away the fun that you're gonna have when they looked at the winery case for the first time. There are only a few cases out there, so I don't want to choose one that will take one from their test case bank. And second, it tells you also when you see for folks that didn't do the FVT case, well, now you don't really need to worry too much about your situational analysis. We're gonna talk more on the reading and planning, and then you can see that, you know what, I don't need really to know 100% of a Capstone 1 case to practice a Day 1 case, right? So later on in your practice, in day 1, you will be able to see maybe I'm able to look at try more cases from the old exams. Okay. All right. So with that in mind, I'm gonna start looking at the FVT case. Well, I asked Mike to share a draft outline I have made. And I'll show it to you first. Please pardon my writing. Here, I can't do that. Okay, we'll let it load a bit. Okay, great. Okay, so here is I use an app. I read it on my iPad, and so pardon me if it's not too the handwriting is not can you really read. So the way I use it is I have probably 2 to 3. I have 2 to 3 blank paper. On the first one, I will always put divide it into 4 quadrants, and then have my situational analysis point up front in the middle. That just to first keep reminding myself I need to link these situational analysis back to different strategic options, and then I'll put different ones. In this case, there are 4 strategic options into the 4 quadrants. This is more helping me to track information. You don't have to put a lot of excessive details on there on your paper outline. Just whatever can help you go to that point, go to that page very easily, or can help yourself to know what points I need to cover. Okay, and then on the second page. All right. On my second page, I keep all the objectives I see in the from reading the case. I list out the financing issues I typically like to see that, because financing is important to my different strategic options. So always keep track of how much financing there are, and if there are any special restrictions in there, I need to pay attention to. And then I leave a operational issue there, and the very last part is the anything it can retain from capstone 1. I put it down right away. So capstone 1, here I usually put what are the key success factors out there. So I just put a few things there, and then if I have a decision criteria, I will also list it there. This is when I finish my first reading and decide, okay, what are the different options, and should I have a criteria to set out to evaluate these. Remember, if I have to rank, I always talk about what should be the ranking methodology, right? And then talk about the results. Okay. So again, this is my preference. Have a paper outline. If you're using computer outline, by all means do that. You can even try it a bit. Use one paper outline for one case and computer outline for another. But the key is, whatever you do, the outline is there to help you track information. Okay, avoid putting excessive information on there. It should tell you what are the key information on there. If what are the information, in fact, is too long to write, tell me the page so I can go back right away to do that. Okay. All right. So let's go to the actual case. Okay. Right. So in terms of how I approach reading and planning, I typically may spend about an hour just do reading and planning, and definitely half an hour is too short, and the reading part isn't there for you to think how to respond to the question. Hopefully you will have that technical foundation background to relatively think quickly after your planning to how to attack that portion and the strategic option. Here is for you to absorb information, right? To understand what is needed, what are the key asks, right? So take time to understand that and the key information. So the way I look at it is, first I will skim through the first page and maybe the intro part. I don't even need to. I typically don't even read the whole paragraph, but I want to see, again, get a sense of what we are, what my role is, and if there anything I need to pay attention. So these are whatever I put notes on the side. These are not the first read notes. We'll get back to that after I read the dialogue. Okay, so for example, the first I noticed the time, right, is May 5th, 2020. The role is where the consulting engagement with FET. Okay, several Canadian manufacturing. Okay, so here the second part talking about the manufacturing layoffs. Okay, viewing industry continue to invest in technology. Okay, so it is very very significant, important part for technology. And the next paragraph talk about they purchase CLR has been good in increasing, represent more than 50% revenue. Okay, but the profits suffer. Okay, good. After the CLR purchase, FET successfully introduced a film club concept. All right, okay, it seems to tell me what has happened. In January, open the gameplays. Okay, again, this is tell me what has happened. All right. Okay, all right, okay. So the next page, FET suffer more because of lower volume. So okay, something's going on. Bonus has not been paid, and then here I will talk 11,000 outstanding common shares been equally. Okay, so not enough cash. Okay. FET expanded beyond theaters. Okay, so it looks like they have a new vision and have a vision statement. Okay, so now here's a point I'm starting to pay attention. Ask you the following. Please draft a report that will form the basis of my presentation to the FET board. Take into account that what you have previously learned about FET and highlight any changes in circumstance that may affect the board decisions. Okay, assess major issues facing and discuss any significant factors that may not have considered. Okay, board one, the coverage of both strategic operational, but emphasis should be on strategic elements. Please suggest course of action. Identify what additional information should be considered. So from reading this, I need to know if I know what I need to do. Okay, so I need to highlight my change in my situational analysis. I need to talk about my strategic issues facing that. Okay, there will be operational and strategic options, but operational issue will never trump strategic issues. And I need to make a recommendation of some sort of a course of action. Okay, and there might be some information is missing. So if I don't have that information, then I need to ask for it. Okay. All right, so here's my meeting dialogue. I'll do my first deep read here. Okay, and then I'll go back to the beginning to see where I can get more stuff I can fill in. Okay, so here, for example, you will see typical kind of a major events has happened. Okay, so I know management position have not been changed. Significant event has occurred. We have sold the head office, is not leasing back. So there is that. Purchased a net asset of CRR for 17 million. Purchase price was paid with 13 on closing of 4 million payable to CRR. The CRR bears the same interest and principal payment original proposed, with the first payment due in 2020. FET borrowed another 5 million to finance acquisition. A secure loan with crypto assets. A loan bears interest of 5% with scheduled annual principal payment of 625,000 beginning on July 1st, 2019. So here is my financing. Remember, on my second page, I have a separate quadrant just to talk about financing. I'll put it there. I don't know the implication there yet, but I think that's important information to note. Okay, so Stephanie purchased shares. So now it is equally owned by so they all have shares in the company, and also there is more loans. So there is a maximum of 1.2 million is secured by the common shareholders' personal guarantees and guarantee from FL. 5%. Okay. So there I will note this is the financing part and what activity it has gone through in the between Capstone 1 and Day 1. Okay, so we need to know the impact of operating cash flows and net earnings for each of the issues we discussed today. So here, right away, is one of your objectives and criteria you need to talk about. Impact of our operating cash flows and net earnings for each of the issues. Okay, so we'll note that in my objectives and criteria. We want to know the impact of operating income as we wanted to reach 5% revenue in the long term. Again, that is one important objective. For this meeting in particular, we must consider investment that could help improve our situation. Okay, so let's start with this TGP financials. Okay, so anytime you see that, be very careful, like highlight them, put it, whatever you do, make sure your analysis somehow touches that point, because it can't be any clearer in this. Your management has asked you to do this, so you shall do that on your part of your quantitative analysis, right? So talk about how you meet the objectives. Okay, all right. So here TG has not been profitable here. So basically now we're getting into a first strategic options. So we'll put it into our quadrants, and then here I will just highlighted a few things. First is the cost. So anything cost related number we need to track. What are the risk? what is the basic issue decision we need to make, right? So here, when Victor says, what about leasing the game instead by letting our supplier absorb the risk? I believe we can make this work. Okay, so kind of now I have the option, right, to whether to continue own those games or I should lease those games. Okay, my staff prepared preliminary analysis. Great. So this you're gonna see that a lot on your day one, right? You won't have to do it from scratch, right? My staff has prepared preliminary analysis. Now my focus will be I need to critique, right? What are the assumptions in using preparing this analysis? Does it make sense? What additional analysis I need to make? Should I put a scenario analysis? Should I do a stress testing of some sort? I don't know yet, but this is what I think I need to do. They estimate a positive operating income from entering into a lease agreement with AGI. The game lease require maintain games. Okay, replace 6 months. Do I have to factor in my calculation, or this more of a qualitative point? Okay, so here we see the first preference, right? So Kent is against this. Okay, so it's not a premier experience. It should be closed and its asset should be sold as soon as possible. Okay, so now it's not my premier experience. Then I notice from my day one, capstone 1 case, well, it could be one of my key success factors, right? So I will slot that into my situational analysis, and I'll probably talk about that, make that link into my strategic option, my qualitative point. Okay, we must move away from dying. Okay, now we're talking about diversification. So different stakeholder preference, diversification is also a good key success factor. Okay, right, so based on my, and then Kent talk about last year results to what you are doing since opening. There's drop in attendance, but this is not consistent with deadlines. Okay, and here you talk about some operational aspect to it, right? So AGI is motivated to keep TGP. They may give us some better terms. So again, this is now we're not necessarily into a strategic part, but to make it work, maybe we need to suggest, well, make sure we need to negotiate with AGI with better terms, right? So that could be that extension of what needs to be done after we have decided. Okay. The game's lease will be 5 years, option to renew. So it's kind of my timeline of 5 years. Okay, so Lenny is against it, too early to close. Okay, begin to worry about FVT is in trouble. Again, that's my a bit of negative part. Will certainly not be providing that to keep TGP open. Okay, that's some strong word there, but from Kent, he is for sure not in line with this. So here, then, from reading this, what I want to highlight is you need to think about first what is kind of like the dynamic, right? Like stakeholder preference, who is kind of who is for, who is against, and start accumulating some thought into what are the pros and cons, right? So I can start slotting them in to my outline. And here they ask for assessment of whether or not a new lease arrangement with AGI or keep open. So now that's my requirement number 1. I need to think about, okay, so I need to either keep it open and start renting, leasing, or I close it down. So now what is the big issue here? Open or close, right? So what do we need to focus on? Well, you need to probably looking at the incremental changes, right? And then what we're going to evaluate against. Now the objectives now suddenly makes more sense. So see the linking here. So that's why it's very important as soon as you identify them, some objectives, start slotting them in. That will help you organize and always think about your quantitative, maybe how that will impact. Okay. So we need to assess whether or not to do that. Okay, so now there's another one. here, so I want to highlight the paragraph Kent was talking about. This is a risk, right? So contribution size will depend on the success of fundraising. In the case of, it could in your qualitative analysis, it could be in the negative part, but also you need to, if we decided to go with this option, what are the subsequent things I need to do, right? Maybe I need to think about providing some risk mitigating methods or factors we can implement if we have to take on this risk. Okay. Here my staff prepared a preliminary analysis. Again, here is our role is to critique your quantitative analysis. Doesn't have to be actual like spreadsheet heavy, but is the mindset, right, to question and think about if that makes sense. Okay, so we're closing too. So what jumps to my mind is the opportunity cost. Okay, so here another preference, right? So Victor isn't too thrilled about this idea, and then now we're throwing down in Lenny, we're throwing down a little bit, a few more of the quant. So now, similar to what you do in day 2 or 3, we need to track it. Okay, so in my outline, I will start putting in what's my fixed rent, how many play, and then what's my share of my rental income, and then here. Again, I'm start picking up the qualitative. What's my mission and vision? Is it in line with my premier theory experience, or is it community focus? Is my focus, right? Okay. Payback period is more than 5 years, so we'll ordinarily look for. Okay, so now we're provide specifically on the payback period. So we need to. This is one method we need to use to evaluate that idea. Okay, very risky venture. So what if it's suddenly shut down? Okay, so here Ken is also talking about it will be your payback period is very conservative. Please recheck. Okay, so this is a hint that we need to take a look at that calculation. Okay, again, now we seems to have a Lenny problem. Every few sentences, I'm being bugged. Again, like, why not, Lenny? Why haven't you done this? What's happening? You haven't do anything. So I will start sensing this. I'll put it somewhere. Doesn't look like it's gonna be strategic, right? So because Lenny isn't playing a critical role here in terms of where it goes, so I will most likely slot it into my operational issues. Okay, we don't have time. Maybe timing is a factor. How we can help him could be talked about. All right, so another options out there. I won't talk more about this option because I think it's similar setup. But as you read through them, I think what's important is you need to look at start first, have a way to organize them, right? So if I the way I'll do it is I will start putting some big information, and then I will think about how I would envision my spreadsheet will be and my quantitative analysis will be. It doesn't have to be detailed. I may even do some sketches, right? To see, okay, here's what my spreadsheet will look like. Here's my title for my rows. Here's my title for my columns, and does it make sense? Okay, incremental difference. Here, for example, on the gameplay, here, whatever assumption makes sense, I will look at the differences. I will tie to my objectives. I will note for my option B, I put, payback period is I need to check. I need to look at the one big part of it is financing cost free. Here, so the TBG, that's a supplier issue, and note down the page. I know, okay, what are the key points, and last but certainly not least, the Quebec closing period, right? So at this point, I've gone through all of my discussion for board, and then I'll go back, reread the first part. At this point, you will. So now you know what you need to do, right? Strategic options. Here you have a purpose. So when I read my background, I want to look at what I can put into my qualitative discussion, and then second, what I can do to put it into my situational analysis. Because here we want to make sure it's very targeted, and want to make sure that I will focus on the change and what are the relevant part, right? So for example, as we talk about here, so there are more layoffs and closures in San Ontario. So that could impact it could be the gameplays. Interest rate has started to rise. Now we know the financing cost, right? So we're going to borrow more. We have a lot of financing. We can't borrow more. Financing costs are going to be an issue. And what does financing link, right? We'll link to, we care about what? We care about operating income. So, or net income. So that will impact certainly my net income figure, right? Technology. Okay, so we keep on talking about technology as a key success factor, right? And a lot of people are saying in the board dialogue says, oh, I'd rather invest in something else. Well, there could be a very, very valid alternative. You invest in your technology and premium and build into your better equipment to serve a premium viewing experience. That's your key success factor, right? So think about how that will now link to your analysis. Okay. All right. So FET purchased CLR. Since that time, the attendance has been increasing and represent more than 50% revenue. Now, that certainly brings a perspective into the magnitude of that option, right? So 50% of revenue. So if we close that down, that is a very significant strategic option. So in terms of ranking, even though it's put the last, I want to discuss it first because it has such a big impact on my revenue as well as my net income, right? So the reason is because of a minimum wage. So unfortunately, there's nothing we can do at this point. So this is more of is a threat, is externally factor. We can do it, but FET's management has had difficulty integrating the two companies. So this can be improved. So as we talk about this strategic option, we think about if we decided to keep CLR, what can we do to make it better? Okay, so that's certainly one thing. And also maybe by integrating the two companies better, that will feed into a better profitability later on. Okay, so here talking about the independent films to film clubs. Again, this could link to our theater option because it's a different viewing experience. Okay, so here not to focus on what the case itself, because obviously a lot of you haven't seen the FET case, but here I'm looking at just to walk through the framework you will see when you approach a day one case, and see how you can integrate and think about how you can building the bridge between your day one, your capstone one, and feed that into your day one case. Okay, so here this paragraph will talk about the internal factors. What I want to make sure here is we talk about additional funds haven't been invested in technology. This is certainly one very big weaknesses we need to discuss. And even so, maybe we need to make it into a strategic criteria to say, hey, that needs to generate sufficient return. We can start feeding into the technology, right? Certainly, that's one possible way to discuss that point. And the second point is towards the end, right? So the focus is shift from growing revenue per attendee to improving net earnings, with a goal of increasing net earnings by 10% in 2020. So here is another, not so explicit, but still important criteria on the objective, and I will put that into my case to start putting that into my objective line, right? To have my earnings increase by 10%, and they would like to get like the operating income and employee bonus to 2016. While at this point, I don't know about what the 2016, so I need to refer back to my case, specifically looking at what is that operating income level, right? So okay, and then another part is a bank loan is next maximum and cannot be increased. So what that means is financing is going to be one of the key criteria. I'm not able to increase more. So whatever I chose cannot impose too much of the financing burden on myself and our company. Okay, here's my vision and mission, and there we go. Okay, so we talk about the dialogue and what to look for, and reading and rereading the first part. So now I want to spend just a few minutes on the exhibits and how you can approach the exhibits. Bear with me for a second. I know it's a lot of pages. So in the exhibits, you can see always, I think, a few things. It could be a bit wordy in terms of just describing a process, describing the numbers in there, or it could be just a very typical quant. So you could see a model output. So, but your goal then is to make sure you look at if it's assumptions, or if it is if they have prepared the analysis, and you look at the assumptions, or pick up the information describing the narrative and start constructing your own model. Okay, so industry benchmark here is what you should focus on your situational analysis and start picking up a few ratios, right? Like you can see, box office revenue has been not doing great for the benchmark. A little bit better than the benchmark, but not anything. While the current ratio is really tanked, so that's signaling the liquidity issue. Operating margin again, so net profit margin, and those things again, because we're focusing on operating cash flow and operating income again, so those margins are important. So in your situational analysis, you should talk about that, but more importantly, refer back into your strategic options, right? Whatever your strategic option says, compared to your objectives, and see those objectives still being met, right? So that's what I would do when I see a more of a company versus benchmark type of appendix. All right, so I have more of the financial statements. Okay. Yeah, depends on the calculation you're going to do. You may have to pick up a specific piece from this financial statements. Okay. So then I will look at the cash and cash equivalent here, right? So we only have $20,000 in cash. That's concerning, right? We have almost $1 million in inventory. So again, why is that? May not be or supply chain may not be operating effectively, right? So see the loans. That's okay. So we kind of know the loans already, and that will certainly be evaluated when you do your closing down the Quebec part. Okay, here is is one for the gameplay. So you see, this is the second part. Here is give you a overview of results. Sometimes you could see more of a lengthy, a bigger discussion of the DCF model part of a printout. Your goal is to make sense of it, right? So it could be very little calculation involved. So what are we being presented? We're being presented operating income, we know the amortization, and if we close down, we have all these real assets. So book value, proceeds, so that we can calculate the gain, right? And net book value of that, what we can get. Is that relevant? Well, is that something we can get? Proceeds of them. So here, the first part, operating income, again, if I look at my objectives, I'm here to improve my operating income and my net income. So then one quick way to do that is see my option A is closed down, option B is to lease. If I close down, if I lease, what is the increase, right? So it's my status quo to open is I'm losing money on 436. If I rent, lease, then I'm making a positive. So overall, we're making money there, right? So just do a quick comparison just to show you, okay, we may meet the one of the objectives, right? And amortization suddenly dropped by almost, dropped by a lot. Before it was almost 3 times. So again, here is a big increase. That will meet the objectives. Okay, and proceeds, again, this is a use if we do that. If you go with closing, we have an immediate proceeds, right? So we could get that needed money that will increase our cash flow. But then again, it's one time. We may not be able to see it again. In terms of assumptions here, I don't really see a lot of stated assumptions, but you can certainly talk about that in your quantitative analysis. Say, hey, I made a rely on the assumption that we're going to get what we can get on the proceeds, and the the net book value is correctly accounted for. Here, I'm also not seeing that one big, variable that dictate the results. So if there's one, in other cases, if there's one thing that could be an input or something that you could certainly see could go either way, then again, here is something you need to do either sensitivity analysis or more of a scenario analysis. Okay, so I know we have 5 minute left, so I will talk about this a bit about the debriefing. So on the debriefing, when you do approach a case like that, first first of all, you can see, have I identified the correct strategic options, right? That's always the number one thing. Number two thing is, now if I have identified them, have I integrated, especially for the qualitative analysis, have I integrated enough my situational analysis? I would physically pull up a highlighter, highlight my situational analysis, find it in my strategic options. If I'm not clear on that, so this is your opportunity to improve. How can I make this clear, right? So am I leaving my marker hanging there? Make it abundantly clear, right? You can, sometimes I see people even say, per my strategic situational analysis, this is this, and then how this will connect. Make it clear, and then for quantitative analysis, see the first big picture, right? So what toolbox did the solution end up using? What have I used? Is it the best method? And have I explained my answers correctly? Okay, and that I think that's important. And if you have chosen the criteria, have I identified the criteria correctly? Have I backed it up correctly? Have I provided sufficient discussion on the results, if they meet the criteria or not? So that's for the strategic options. For operational issues, see how many are there, first of all, and see what are the critical, and then ask yourself, like, have I given enough time to draft, right? Maybe you only have, let's say, 40 minutes to address an operational issue. There's no way you can answer all of them. And to me, for the roles for the ones you have written, is it insufficient depth, right? So here we're looking really for the quality of your response. So and then overall, the macro level, what is my planning? How long have that process taken? Have I captured everything I need to tracking on my outline, right? So how useful is my outline? Kind of make it more useful on my exam. So here's just to conclude again, this is more of a give you a flavor, right? I know a lot of candidates or students are still in capstone 1 mode. They're not ready yet to write to think about CFE day 1. I'm here just to highlight some differences between capstone 1 and day 1, what you could prepare, and a few of the technical refresher. But I hope this reading and planning at least gives you if there's a new way of approaching the reading of day 1 case. And a lot of that comes from case writing experience. So definitely case writing is important, and debrief is important as well. With that in mind, I'll see if Mike can show me a few more questions. Right. Okay, sorry. Okay. All right. Okay. So I got a couple questions. First, where can you get a FET case itself? They're published on the CPA website. It's all public information, as well as the winery case. You just the way I got it is I simply Googled capstone 1 case, CPA Canada. Then you go there, and then you're able to you can get onto the website and talk about look at that. I wouldn't suggest you looking at more cases on FET because it is already passed. So, and you already have a couple of exam questions on the in the CFE examiner's report. So I think that from your preparation perspective is good enough. Another question on implementation. All right, so implementation is, I think, it also depends on your strategic options, right? So if your strategic options are somewhat connected, you may want to talk about, and there's a big picture issue there, right? So you may want to talk about that in your, after you talk about all your strategic options, in your conclusion part, to say, okay, so here is our course of action, and to make it work, I suggest we adopt this approach. And also, in visiting your each strategic option, you could also see a few mission critical, right? You can always talk about that in your conclusion for that strategic option as well, to say, in order to make it work, we need to do this. Okay, so it depends on the macro view of your case. So that's a very very quick answer to that. All right, so thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time off to watch this webinar. I hope I've answered your questions related to your CFE Day 1. I'm sure there will be other opportunities later on in the Prep Formula CFE Live Days or other subsequent webinars to talk more on CFE Day 1. I'm looking forward to talking to you more. Thank you.